The lights flickered and died throughout Cairo on the night of April 5th. 1923. In room number 28 of the Continental Hotel, George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, drew his final breath at 1:47 in the morning, miles away in England, at the family estate of Highclere Castle. Carnarvon's beloved fox terrier Susie reportedly howled once and collapsed dead. Within hours, the international press had their story. The man who had funded the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, the greatest archaeological find of the century, had fallen victim to the pharaoh's curse. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king, screamed the headlines worldwide. To understand how the curse narrative took hold, we need to return to that extraordinary November morning in 1922. Howard Carter, a stubborn Yorkshire-born archaeologist, had been searching the Valley of the Kings for over 15 years. Most experts believed the valley had given up all its secrets, but Carter was convinced one tomb remained undiscovered, that of the boy Pharaoh Tutankhamun. On November 4th, Carter's water boy accidentally struck a stone step with his jar. By November 26th, Carter had cleared enough debris to reveal a sealed doorway. He made a small hole and pushed a candle through. The flame flickered in the stale air of 3 millennia. "Can you see anything?" asked his patron, Lord Carnarvon, standing behind him in the narrow corridor. Carter's reply would become legendary. "Yes. Wonderful things." The discovery electrified the world. Here was an intact pharaoh's tomb, filled with golden treasures, that had remained untouched for over 3,000 years. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The Great War had ended just 4 years earlier, leaving millions dead and a generation hungry for wonder. Ancient Egypt, with its mysterious hieroglyphs and elaborate death rituals, offered everything the 1920s craved: exotic mystery, fabulous wealth, and escape from the modern world's harsh realities. The excavation team was small but distinguished. Carter led the archaeological work with meticulous precision. Lord Carnarvon provided the funding and political connections necessary to work in British-controlled Egypt. His daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, served as the expedition's photographer and chronicler. Arthur Mace, from New York's Metropolitan Museum, handled the delicate conservation work. Harry Burton created the iconic photographs we still associate with the discovery today. But this wasn't just archaeology. It was a media sensation occurring at a time when spiritualism was mainstream rather than fringe. Seances were fashionable entertainment among the educated classes. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of the rational Sherlock Holmes, was a devoted believer in ghosts and fairies. The public was primed for supernatural explanations. The stage was perfectly set for a curse. Lord Carnarvon's death came just 5 months after the tomb's opening, but the circumstances were far more mundane than supernatural. In late February 1923, while shaving in his Cairo hotel room, Carnarvon accidentally nicked a mosquito bite on his left cheek with his razor. This detail matters because Carnarvon had been in declining health for over 20 years. In 1901, he'd suffered a serious automobile accident in Germany, one of the first recorded car crashes involving a British aristocrat. The accident damaged his lungs and left him with chronic respiratory problems. His doctors had been warning him for years that his compromised immune system made him vulnerable to infection. In the era before antibiotics, that razor nick became infected. Within days, the infection had spread through his bloodstream. Dr. Johnny Johnson, who attended Carnarvon during his final illness, kept detailed medical records. The progression was textbook: localized infection, fever, pneumonia, blood poisoning, death. There was nothing mysterious about it. Yet, when Carnarvon died at 1:47 a.m. on April 5th, the story that spread wasn't about medical realities. It was about the lights going out across Cairo at the exact moment of death, about his dog Susie dying simultaneously back in England, about ancient Egyptian vengeance reaching across 3 millennia. The power failure was real, but hardly supernatural. Cairo's electrical grid in 1923 was a marvel of modern engineering that failed spectacularly on a regular basis. The city's British-operated power company confirmed that mechanical problems caused the blackout, which lasted several hours and affected the entire system. These outages happened roughly once a week. As for Susie, the fox terrier, this touching detail appears nowhere in contemporary family letters or newspaper reports from England. It seems to have been invented entirely by creative journalists who understood that a simultaneous pet death made the story irresistibly eerie, but rational explanations couldn't compete with supernatural sensation. Arthur Conan Doyle declared Carnarvon's death the most definite proof of occult forces. Popular novelist Marie Corelli claimed she had predicted it, writing to newspapers, "I cannot but think some risks are run by breaking into the last rest of a king of Egypt whose tomb is specially and solemnly guarded." Within days, headlines around the world proclaimed the curse of the pharaohs. The public was captivated. If Carnarvon's death could be explained by medical science, what about the others who began dying in the months that followed? The curse narrative gained unstoppable momentum as more expedition members met untimely ends. Arthur Mace died in April 1928, 5 years after the tomb's discovery. Mace had been instrumental in the careful removal of the tomb's most fragile artifacts, working alongside Carter in the cramped burial chambers for months at a time. Surely this was supernatural vengeance? The medical reality was less dramatic. Mace had been suffering from pleurisy, a painful inflammation of the lung lining, since before Tutankhamun's tomb was ever discovered. His condition was well documented in letters to his family and Metropolitan Museum colleagues. He'd been requesting lighter duties for years due to his declining health. His death at 54 was premature, but hardly mysterious. George J. Gould, the American Railroad heir, visited the tomb in 1923 and died later that year. The press immediately added him to the curse's victim list. What they failed to mention was that Gould suffered from severe respiratory problems and a weak heart. His death from pneumonia occurred months after his Egyptian visit, during a trip to the French Riviera where he'd gone seeking warmer climate for his lungs. Perhaps most poignantly, Colonel Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, died in September 1923. Herbert had briefly visited the tomb site and was quickly claimed as another curse victim. The truth was more tragic. Herbert had been nearly blind since childhood due to a congenital condition. His death resulted from complications following his 5th unsuccessful eye surgery, performed by a doctor who was later struck off the medical register for incompetence. Each death was genuinely tragic. Each had a perfectly rational medical explanation, but rational explanations don't sell newspapers. The curse narrative was simply too compelling to abandon for mundane medical facts. Why did the curse story prove so irresistible? The answer lies in understanding the unique cultural moment of the 1920s. World War I had shattered traditional certainties. Millions of families had lost sons, husbands, fathers. Spiritualism offered comfort, the hope of communicating with the dead. By 1923, seances were mainstream entertainment. Ouija boards were parlor games. Even respected intellectuals like Conan Doyle genuinely believed in supernatural forces. The media landscape amplified these tendencies. The Times of London had secured exclusive rights to the tomb story, leaving dozens of competing newspapers scrambling for angles. The curse provided perfect alternative coverage. Sensational, unprovable, and endlessly fascinating to readers hungry for mystery. There was also a deeper colonial anxiety at work. Egypt in the 20s was nominally independent, but still under heavy British influence. Many Egyptians resented foreign archaeologists removing their cultural treasures. The curse narrative, while sensational, carried undertones of cosmic justice. The idea that Western tomb robbers were being punished for cultural theft resonated with both Egyptian nationalism and European guilt about imperial exploitation. Ancient Egypt itself seemed to demand supernatural explanations. The civilization that built the pyramids, mummified its dead, and covered tomb walls with mysterious hieroglyphs appeared to possess secrets beyond modern understanding. When distinguished figures like Conan Doyle and Marie Corelli endorsed the curse, their authority gave supernatural explanations intellectual respectability. The story also benefited from what we now recognize as confirmation bias. Deaths among expedition members made headlines and stuck in public memory. The long, healthy lives of other team members were ignored or forgotten. When someone tangentially connected to the tomb died years later of natural causes, it was attributed to the curse. When people with no tomb connection died under similar circumstances, it was simply mortality. By 1930, 8 years after the tomb's discovery, newspapers had compiled impressive lists of curse victims. But what did the actual evidence show? The most comprehensive analysis came decades later from Dr. Mark Nelson at the University of Melbourne. In 1980, Nelson conducted a thorough statistical study of everyone connected with the tomb's discovery and excavation. His methodology was rigorous. He tracked down birth and death records, medical histories, and family documents for 58 individuals who could reasonably be considered part of the expedition or closely connected to it. His findings demolished the curse theory. The average age at death for cursed individuals was 70 years, actually higher than the general population average for their social class and time period. When Nelson compared death rates with carefully matched control groups, he found no statistically significant difference. If anything, the tomb discoverers lived slightly longer than expected. The pattern becomes even clearer when we examine specific cases that were attributed to the curse. Richard Bethel, Carter's secretary, died in 1929 in his London club. Newspapers immediately proclaimed another curse victim. Investigation revealed that Bethel had been under medical care for heart disease for over 2 years. His doctors had repeatedly warned him to avoid stress and excitement. When Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, died by suicide shortly after his son's death, papers claimed the curse had struck again. They ignored the fact that Lord Westbury had been suffering from severe depression and had attempted suicide multiple times in previous years, long before his son had any connection to Egyptian archaeology. The curse narrative required cherry-picking deaths while ignoring longevity. It demanded dramatic interpretation of ordinary medical events while dismissing obvious natural causes. Most tellingly, it completely ignored the health and survival of those who spent the most time in the tomb. The most devastating evidence against the curse comes from examining the fate of those who had the most extensive contact with Tutankhamun's tomb and its contents. Howard Carter himself lived 17 more years after the discovery, dying in 1939 at age 64, a respectable lifespan for the era. Carter had spent more time in the tomb than anyone else, personally handling artifacts, overseeing every excavation detail, and working alone in the burial chambers for countless hours. If supernatural forces were targeting tomb violators, Carter should have been the primary victim. Instead, he continued his archaeological work, wrote definitive books about the discovery, and enjoyed international acclaim. He found the curse theories ridiculous. The sentiment of the Egyptologist, he wrote, is not one of fear, but of respect and awe, entirely opposed to foolish superstitions. Dr. Douglas Derry, the anatomist who performed the autopsy on Tutankhamun's mummy, not only survived but thrived. Derry unwrapped the mummy, removed the famous golden mask, and conducted detailed examinations of the pharaoh's remains. He lived to 87 and continued archaeological work for decades. In later interviews, he dismissed the curse as complete nonsense, pointing out that his long career studying Egyptian mummies had brought nothing but professional satisfaction. Lady Evelyn Herbert's survival was particularly significant. She had been present at virtually every major moment: the first glimpse into the antechamber, the opening of the burial chamber, the unsealing of the nested coffins. She handled artifacts, photographed the contents, and spent weeks working in the tomb's confined spaces. If the curse targeted those who disturbed the peace of the king, she should have been among the first victims. Instead, Lady Evelyn lived until 1980, dying at 79 after a full active life that included marriage, children, and decades of travel. She often spoke fondly of her time in Egypt and never expressed belief in supernatural retribution. Harry Burton, whose photographs provide our most iconic images of the tomb's contents, spent hundreds of hours alone in the burial chambers, setting up complex lighting arrangements. He handled artifacts directly and was present for virtually every significant discovery. His death in 1940 was attributed to natural heart failure at age 60, with no suggestion of anything supernatural. So, why does the curse narrative persist? Nearly a century later, polls consistently show that significant percentages of people still believe something supernatural occurred in the Valley of the Kings. The answer reveals fundamental aspects of human psychology. We're pattern-seeking creatures, especially drawn to patterns that confirm existing beliefs or tap into deep fears. The 1920s were a time of profound social change, and many people felt disconnected from traditional sources of meaning. Ancient Egypt seemed to offer access to spiritual truths that cold modern science couldn't provide. The curse story also benefited from what psychologists call the availability heuristic. We judge probability by how easily we can remember examples. Curse-related deaths made headlines and lodged in memory. Ordinary longevity among expedition members was boring and forgettable. The dramatic overshadowed the mundane. Media incentives amplified these psychological tendencies. Supernatural stories sold papers and magazines. Rational medical explanations were commercially worthless. Even when journalists knew the facts, that Carnarvon was chronically ill, that Mace had documented lung disease, that Cairo's power grid failed regularly. They emphasized supernatural angles because mystery outsells reality. There was also an element of cultural guilt, the removal of artifacts from Egyptian tombs, while legal under colonial arrangements, made many uncomfortable. The curse provided cosmic justice. Western tomb robbers being punished for cultural theft appealed to both Egyptian pride and European anxieties about imperial exploitation. Perhaps most importantly, the curse filled psychological needs that rational explanations couldn't satisfy. In an age of rapid technological advancement, many yearned for mystery and magic. The idea that ancient forces could still influence the modern world was comforting to those who felt science was stripping away life's deeper meanings. The real legacy of Tutankhamun's tomb lies not in supernatural vengeance, but in its extraordinary contribution to human knowledge. The artifacts recovered provided unprecedented insights into ancient Egyptian art, religion, and daily life. The meticulous documentation and conservation techniques pioneered by Carter's team established archaeological standards still followed today. The tomb's treasures revealed a civilization of stunning sophistication and artistic achievement. Golden death masks, intricate jewelry, ornate furniture, and weapons of surpassing craftsmanship, these artifacts expanded our understanding of human creativity and ancient technical mastery. The careful scientific analysis of mummy remains provided crucial data about ancient Egyptian health, diet, and life expectancy. The curse narrative, while historically false, offers its own valuable lessons about human nature and media power. It demonstrates how compelling stories can overwhelm rational explanations, especially when those stories tap into fundamental fears and desires. In our current age of viral misinformation and social media sensation, the lessons remain remarkably relevant. The men and women who discovered and excavated Tutankhamun's tomb weren't victims of ancient curses. They were pioneers who expanded human knowledge and preserved one of history's greatest cultural treasures. Howard Carter's patient archaeology, Arthur Mace's conservation expertise, Lady Evelyn Herbert's documentation, Harry Burton's photography, these represent humanity at its best, driven by curiosity and dedicated to truth. Their real legacy isn't death and superstition, but the enduring wonder of discovery and the triumph of careful scholarship over sensational fiction. The boy pharaoh's treasures continue inspiring new generations of archaeologists, historians, and artists. His golden mask remains one of humanity's most recognizable artistic achievements, but our tendency to prefer dramatic stories over mundane truths, that human characteristic, for better and worse, appears truly eternal. The next time you encounter a story that seems too dramatic to be true, remember the lesson of Tutankhamun's curse. Sometimes the most compelling explanation is simply wrong, and sometimes the truth, while less sensational, proves far more meaningful than any fiction we could invent.